I attended a gay Catholic priest's last mass before leaving ministry. There was a number of other former clerics and priests and other people in the church that flew in to support this man before leaving ministry. And I want to tell you a little bit about Father Jordan's backstory, a little bit about how that weekend went, and some of my own reflections as somebody who is super involved in the Catholic movement. A few weeks ago, I got a DM from somebody on Instagram, and his handle started with @Father. And I was like, oh, we have a Catholic priest reaching out to me, and he was saying that he was wanting to leave the priesthood, and that he was looking at potentially doing it relatively soon. He wasn't asking for anything, he just wanted to connect. And so we were chatting on DMs. He still believed in God, he was still religious, but he was seeking out greater transparency, greater authenticity in life, and was maybe a little bit burned out from ministry. And for context, at this point, he had given almost 2 decades of his life to the church. But here's the thing, he had wanted to be a priest since he was 8 years old. The priesthood was all he wanted to do growing up. He was on fire for the Lord at youth group. He was ready to become a priest and went to seminary, and it was great. He was in the States and then also went to Europe a ton, and seminary was like the time to be alive. And then he was finally ordained. Top of his class, doing well loved by the local town. But there's some challenges with being a priest, both in the overall lifestyle, namely celibacy, loneliness, and a lack of autonomy over your life. And then inside of the actual ministry, you have so many hats to wear as a priest. You're a therapist, you're a theologian, you're a pastor, you're a social worker, you're the administrator of a multi-million-dollar nonprofit, you are people's bosses, you are who people look to at the worst times in life, at the best times in life, and people are always asking of you, and you have to do whatever the bishop tells you to do. And then on top of all of this, Father Jordan was assaulted by another priest. And it was a huge legal battle, both inside of the church and also in the legal system, and his bishop handled that terribly. Assault of that kind is really, really harmful, but then to have your livelihood and your boss and the person that runs your life also not on your side, and then to see your abuser still out there in the community, Father Jordan said that that really took a toll on him. And as Father Jordan was looking to leave the priesthood, it's a really hard thing to do because he had spent all of his adult life, his entire career, his education, his livelihood, day in and day out for nearly 20 years. He knew that he would be leaving everything behind and essentially starting his life over from scratch as a layperson somewhere in the country. And so in the priesthood, a lot of people stick around because it's so hard to leave. But in Father Jordan's case, it was worth it for him to leave. And so over the next few weeks, I connected him with a few other former clerics that have reached out, kind of strategizing how to leave, how to resign, how to navigate all of that. And then when he was looking at the actual paperwork before he tendered his resignation, as soon as he leaves the priesthood, after 20 years of service, he gets nothing. No stipend, no warm wishes, nothing. He's out on his own. And that's bad. But then his abuser will get benefits for a long time, will get a stipend for a long time. And it's this wild thing that if you voluntarily leave the priesthood, to be honest with yourself, to live a life of transparency, authenticity, or you're burnt out, whatever it is, if you voluntarily leave, you have nothing. But if you get credibly accused of being an abuser, you still get paid. You still get benefits. Father Jordan, who was voluntarily leaving on good terms with his diocese, is being treated way worse than his abuser. And so he got ready to tender his resignation, turned into the bishop, and got his last mass on the calendar, and he'd be kicked out that next day. After having fundraised millions of dollars, after having opened new parishes and building the school and flipping things around as a pillar of the local community, as a leader for 20 years. And so when myself and this other group of guys who are former clerics heard about that, we decided to fly in for his last mass. And for context, these are guys who were priests, who were seminarians, who were Jesuits, who were Society of St. Pius X, who were just super devout lay people. Most of us hadn't been to church in ages, and there's a lot of emotional baggage with going back to church, but we wanted to support Father Jordan. So we all booked flights, we got an Airbnb, and as his date approached, We had lots of calls. We were there to support him. And then we flew in. And so after having known these guys for months and talking online, we flew in, we landed, and it was wild for myself and for everybody else to see each other really for the first time in person. Drove up to where Father Jordan was staying and got ready for the next few days. We were out with dinner with Father Jordan in his local town, and he is so well loved there. We were at a restaurant, and I think he talked to at least 24 different people that knew him by name, that were wishing him well. It was amazing to see just how supportive his local community was and how well revered he was. A lot of dioceses, a lot of parishes have very different cultures around priests leaving, and to see just this local Catholic and faithfully Catholic community still be supportive of Jordan as he was leaving, a number of the former clerics that I talked to were just floored by how supportive that local community was. And Jordan was very nervous because he was having to rebuild his entire life. It was his last time seeing everybody because he wasn't going to stay in the small town that he was the priest in. And knowing that he'd be immediately kicked out onto the street. When we woke up the morning of his last mass, his abuser emailed him. And he didn't bother to read it. We had him just archive that. And on that last day, to just finally be free of that institution, to get that was, I can't even imagine what that was like. And so on that day, before his last mass and talking and hanging out, we could tell that he was just exhausted from 20 years of dedicated service, building up the multiple parishes, building up the school, giving his all to the priesthood, and suffering in silence for that long. He was just exhausted. And so on that last mass, I hadn't been to church in 2 years. I hadn't been to mass at all. And a number of the other guys hadn't been in a long time. But we all went to mass. And let me just tell you, it was packed. At an evening mass in the middle of the week, it was packed to the brim. And Jordan wanted us as a group sitting up front. And it was just beautiful. The mass itself had the full choir. The community was there to support him, and Jordan gave a great homily about not hiding from God, being authentic, and it was a great message, and you could tell how much it weighed on him. And when he was distributing communion for the last time to all of these people who he had been part of their lives for, he was weeping. Like the weight that he felt of leaving his flock behind was immense, but also knowing that he had to get better, that he wanted to be doing better and living life, it was an amazing thing to see. And afterwards, the reception line was so long. Everybody was lining up to wish him well, to give him cards, to give him gifts, to just wish him well in his next chapter in life. And so many of us were floored that this local Catholic community knew that their priest was leaving and were happy for him to live his best life. Like that was beautiful. And so after that mass, we got back to the Airbnb and we talked and hung out, and he invited some of his friends over. And it was beautiful to see all of these guys who worked through religious trauma show up to the mass, to be there for him, and then to have that talk afterwards as he took off the collar for the last time. It was powerful. And the next day, he packed up and we all left. And the day after that, he started his new job. He's taking things slow emotionally and has so much to work through, and is doing such great work on himself. And that process is slow, but the actual process of moving on, like 2 days later, he had to start a new job to pay bills, to have something to do, but he still had hope. He was ready for that next chapter, to just take time for himself, to get better, to just live life and work through everything. He had hope. He's a strong man, and he's been through so much, and to see that hope in his eyes the next day, and in these past few weeks, seeing him doing well, it's been amazing. And one thing that we all talked to him about, and that he knows, and from the therapists he's talked to, you immediately leave, but it takes your body a few months to finally slow down and realize that it's safe. I remember after I left, it was a really dark period, but I was still going, I was still moving, I was still shaking, I was out and rebuilding my life. And it took like 6 months for my body to realize I wasn't in that anymore. To forget about the shame and the guilt and some of those memories. My body finally was like, we can rest, and it needed to take a rest. And so I was There's a few months later, I took a few months and was like, kind of like out of a lot of things. And so talking to the other guys, he knows it'll take a few months. He'll have a great few months, and then like things will finally hit a little bit later on. And then there's so much to work through. Leaving high demand religion, there's physically leaving, and then there's mentally leaving, and then mentally healing. And those are all on different tracks at different times. And there's all the stages to grief and to leaving and to loss and all of these things. And so here's some of my reflections as somebody who is thoroughly involved in Catholicism, radical about it, especially from a traditional bent. And I haven't been to Mass in 2 years. That was my first time going back into a church or really even like talking with a priest in person. So here's some of my reflections. 1, the resilience of the queer community is amazing. Talking to all of these guys who've been through terrible things and are on their own journeys, the trauma of being kicked out of your family, the trauma of being abused in the priesthood, the trauma of being in high control religion, the trauma of losing everything when you leave, and all the other challenges of living as a queer person in the modern world. There was a lot of brokenness in the guys who were there, but everybody was resilient. Everybody still had a hope. Everybody was working through things through therapy and community building and helping other people. It was amazing to see the resilience. And I also feel like 2 years later, my perspective on Christianity has shifted. That when you're in the religion and you're in this metaphorical substrate, when you're surrounded by these myths and this awe and all these examples, like the story of Jesus weighs on you and you would never dare blaspheme and there's so much shame and guilt around leaving. But 2 years later, I remember the night before his last Mass, we got a tour of the huge parish and school and all of that jazz. And it was fun to just walk around a church and not feel the need to bow and to reverence and to just walk around and appreciate it as a historical, cultural monument. One of my takeaways, the story of Jesus isn't compelling, like at all. Like it's kind of a bad story. And I get that so many people, it's a source of joy, it's a source of hope, it is an amazing thing, and I'm not here to take that away from you. But as somebody who hasn't been involved in that ethos for 2 years, you start realizing like there's amazing works of Greek literature and Indian and Japanese and European and South American literature. There's much more inspiring stories out there. And so it's interesting to like finally admit that because I didn't feel this weight. And another thing that hit me, my heart bled when I saw that packed parish of people of all different ages, how many queer people are still stuck, especially those younger folks that are stuck in families that don't even have the mental tools to think through these big issues, and that emotional toll of staying with a faith that marginalizes them. Like I know so many people that have reached out in the comments and email and DMs where they love Jesus and they can also accept their queer identity and faith does nothing but add to their lives, and that's awesome. But there's so many people that are stuck in particular sects of religion that their shame and guilt and self-hatred is from the thing that they hold most dear in life. And then also seeing how well organized his parish was, and that's just one of many parishes out there, and how well structured the Catholic movement and media empire is, I think I'm more passionate now than ever to help with a response. Like this response against the Catholic Church, against the traditional Catholic movement, against the injustice of the priesthood, against the harm and the garbage that is thrown out there by the Catholic media movement. Like we need to be organized, and it has been an honor the past few weeks talking to so many other creators out there in this space. I want to make a broader response to the harms of Catholicism, both intellectually and personally and societally. We need a response, and I don't know exactly what that looks like, but we need a response out there. And I think after talking to a few creators, we're at this inflection point that people are ready to fight the institutional church. And a final thought on all of this, that we're all on different journeys. Like the great thing about being secular is that when somebody stays religious, I don't have to have a problem with that. I don't have to change their mind. That talking to Jordan, who still considers himself Catholic, to people who move on to the Episcopalian Church or leave all religion together like myself, like we are all on different journeys. And we could also mobilize with people inside of the church. And what I found after talking to all of these other clerics and myself and people in the traditional movement is this idea like rigid faiths are strong and then they shatter and can never be put back together. Like for myself and other people who believed so dogmatically and that everything the church says is true, and then you leave and it all falls apart, there are still people out there whose faiths were more nuanced, more loving, more about joy and a relationship than ours were. And so me leaving has no implications on if you should leave, and to be able to support people on their own journeys, while also recognizing the enemy that we're all fighting and drawing a firm line in the sand. And so lastly, I want to move into some reflections from some of the other guys who were there. The first being a former seminarian who was in seminary for a diocese for a long time, and his thoughts. He feels like he's growing personally. That he was at a mass a few months ago for a wedding and just couldn't take it, but now having worked healing religious trauma, to go to mass and to sing the songs, to participate, but to not have them hold weight on him. That he can sing the songs because he realizes that they're just these cultural things, that they're just ideas that don't exist, and to be able to participate, that was really powerful to see. One of the other guys on this trip was a former SSPX oblate who said that he was just floored by how supportive Jordan's local community was. That when this guy left, he was not on great terms with people, that once he left, it was just everybody put up a wall and he left everything behind, and there's a shame around leaving. But to see Jordan and his community rally around him was flooring and edifying, and it was amazing to see. And then he said he was just happy for Jordan's new life, to see these new beginnings, to help get him back on his feet, was just a beautiful thing to see. And the last guy who wanted to share some reflections was a transitional deacon. Regardless if somebody dogmatically or supernaturally believes or not, religion is a thing that we can work with, that we can talk to people about, that has a broad implication both on ourselves and society and the world. And so to still study that, after he gave almost a decade of his life to the church, that he thinks it's something to study rather than outright reject. And my final note of hope is that we are all one big, queer, dysfunctional, hopeful, resilient, beaten down, but still have hope for the future community, wanting to make the world a better place, to help people out there. That if you're watching this and you're in a similar situation to him, or are dealing with leaving high control religion, like, it is possible. It's not easy, but it is possible to go out and to start living an awesome life. I think is an amazing thing, and that you can do it. And on that note, I run a Discord community that if you want to join and talk to other people who had a similar life story, click the link down below to support my work on Patreon. I'm thinking about starting an anti-traditional kind of media accelerator program. I have a lot of resources and do this professionally. Would love to coach other people on making content in this movement too. If you want to support my particular work, I would love your financial support on Patreon to be able to fly new places, to be able to bring in more guests in studio. That would be amazing to start mobilizing against tradition. And if you're currently trapped in the priesthood and want to reach out one-on-one, my email or my DMs are always open. I'd love to talk and connect you with some other clerics who have also left that can help you kind of navigate finding a new career, the emotional side of it, finding resources, the social work. And also, I just can't thank you guys enough for watching this content, for being part of this community. The amount of support and in messages and ways in which I think this is helping is just overwhelming. It's an honor that I can just talk on camera here and hundreds of thousands of people watch, and that you guys are there supporting and listening to the podcast and the main channel and talking to each other and supporting one another. I cannot say thank you enough for everything. I'm here in my new studio. The content game's going to be stepping up even more. And if you've stuck around this long, you've got this. There is still hope out there, that your life is worth living and that things really do get better.